call clear, Karen.
Thank you, Mr Chair. Well, hear to that from the Labour Party. Mr Chair, well, golly is all I can say. Golly, which isn't a swear word in Parliament, but ultimately the passage of this bill through the House is a bit of a travesty and a serious embarrassment to this government. Has been said so on numerous occasions by members on this side of the House. They seem impervious to that, and I suppose the conclusion that one can draw is that the national government of New Zealand is not committed to Radio New Zealand and certainly not to public broadcasting in this country. What is public broadcasting? It is the ability of New Zealanders to have their voices reflected back to them and to have good analysis and debate in a way that is impartial and is not coloured by commercial interests. Unfortunately, in this country, that is almost out the door. Radio New Zealand is the last bastion of that, and it is clearly not valued by this government. Mr Chair, I want to address my comments specifically to the SOP by the Minister, which is a relatively comprehensive supplementary order paper, which was tabled in the House without the ability for a select committee or to have a discussion, for there to be any debate, for there to be any submissions. Now, Labor supports the SOP, but it's quite comprehensive, and it disturbs me that such a comprehensive amendment to a piece of legislation which has sat on the order papers essentially since 2009 can go through this House with comprehensive amendment without the ability to have a debate, have some discussion about it, and even for the Minister to comment. And I've got some specific questions tonight for the Minister, which I expect to be answered during the course of this committee stage, because if they're not answered, Mr Chair, then this Parliament is a joke. And the way that our system operates is not. There is no ability to have questions answered and for matters to be properly canvassed, especially matters which go to the core of how our democracy operates. And broadcasting is an essential plank of our democracy, even though the members on the other side of the House might not agree with that. The SOP introduced by Amy Adams is, as I said, supported by Labor. We do not believe that this amendment will fundamentally weaken the existing charter, which is the guts of this bill. But what it does do, and it does something that's new, and when the Minister spoke in the second reading, she talked about modernising Radio New Zealand, is make provision for multi-platform provisions and for the generation of new content-related revenue streams overseas. Now, anybody who is, and of course a lot of New Zealanders now are watching content on their devices or through their televisions using smart TVs or Chromecast or whatever apparatus they're buying from their providers. Ultra-fast broadband is actually improving people's access to and the speed and the ability to download and access content. Radio New Zealand is doing its best, and I'd like to give them that credit tonight, absolutely, is doing its best to keep up and to provide those platforms. So that, and despite, and the big issue is that they're trying to do it within the existing funding envelope, which has been frozen since 2009, and which has ultimately taken them backwards in their budget by 25%, and it's probably more than that, and it's time I did another calculation, Mr Chair. So what this SOP does is that it updates, and it updates dealing with new platforms. What it doesn't do, Mr. Chair.
This is fourth and final call.
Thank you. What it doesn't do is empower Radio New Zealand to extend its operations onto new platforms and find opportunities to commercialise its content overseas because of that frozen budget. And that is a really important point tonight for everybody listening to this. You know, they may be listening through Radio New Zealand, they may be watching on Parliament TV, which is another small expression of public broadcasting in this country, is that there is no new money. And so what Radio New Zealand is trying to do with its new platforms is actually do it within existing envelope. So I've got 3 amendments to those, through 3 of my own SOPs tonight, which are, if anybody has bothered on the other side of the House to actually pay attention to this, is to try and to clarify what the Minister's intention actually was. And we have serious questions about a couple of things, and I just want to touch on them. And so Section 8AB 3A, B and C creates boundaries around the services that the public radio company may provide, but it does not state who is to determine whether any proposed service is consistent with its role as a public broadcaster. That's absolutely critical, Mr. Chair, because is it the Minister? Who is this determination? Who is the determiner? Is it the Minister? And the SOP is absent on this matter. And because there's been no select committee process, no chance to question officials, we want the Minister to answer who makes that decision. Is it to be the Minister of Broadcasting? In which case, there needs to be safeguards. Safeguards, which is my SOP number 1. Which determines basically if it is the Minister of Broadcasting, there has to be safeguards around that. This is absolutely critical. Conflict of interest issues are at stake here for New Zealand. If it's not to be the Minister and if it's to be the board, then there also has to be safeguards around that. And so we have another SOP which goes to the heart of that, Mr. Chair. And I think that because the Minister, I request that the Minister of Broadcasting during the committee stages on this debate actually answers those questions, because otherwise we're passing a piece of legislation which is neglecting to answer some fundamental questions which we need those answers. The other issue which the people listening at home need to know is that Radio New Zealand's budget is frozen. Its ability to actually enact what is in this legislation, what is in this SOP that the Minister has put forward, is severely compromised by its frozen funding. It's doing a laudable job in creating new platforms through the internet, through using all the mediums through that it possibly can to deliver news, but it's been deliberately starved. Its news budget is compromised in order to build these new platforms, in order to provide these new services. It's compromising the existing budget, and New Zealand needs to New Zealanders who love Radio New Zealand, who think of it as a treasure, as a taonga for our country, and every survey that's ever been done ought to be asking and need to have answered the questions as to why it's in this situation and just what's going to be done about it. This SOP that the Minister has put before the House, while Labor supports it, we have our own 3 SOPs which I am asking the House tonight to support, which provide some clarity around the powers of either the board or the Minister in determining how those decisions get made. We need those answers. And in the meantime, Radio New Zealand is continuing to do, and I think it's one of those organisations that we should really give a great big tick to in terms of how it does manage the limited budget that it has, and has attempted to do that over the last more than 7 years. But the Minister needs to answer those questions tonight.